Well, hey, can we all just give Sienna a round of applause? That was awesome. We have to give everyone, okay, let's be raw for a moment, okay? So we're like streaming online, but we also have people here in person. And I think the people here in person, in the physical realm, I think they don't know what they can do here. You're allowed to do whatever you like here. So you can clap, you can cheer, you can encourage, you can talk. You are not going to make it hard for anyone that's watching online at home or anything like that. It's church as normal down here with a few slight kind of changes. But man, how much did that I'm a Child of God, how much did that lady just rock that song? Oh my goodness, she nailed that. That was really like powerful. Like, if this was like old school church, I'd be like, we're going to sing that again, just so I could hear her sing that again. Unbelievable. So I turned to Amy and I said, she just made that my new favorite song. Like, it's just, whew, that's powerful. And that's what we are. We're children of God. And we're starting a new series. We're officially kicking it off next week, but I just want to kind of give the premise of what this new series is this week. It's called Your Story. Your Story. And the reason why I think this is such a super important series to talk about is because our whole lives are full of stories. Full of stories. When we get together, when families come back together at Christmas time and things like that, we talk about stories. We share stories that we've experienced depending on the time frame that we have. We even share old stories together that we've heard thousands of times, but we like it when someone tells that story, yes? We pay billions upon billions of dollars a year to go to well, not us personally, but the world collectively, to go to the movies to watch stories, yes? To see a story unfold in front of us. We purchase books, we buy books and we read about stories, people telling us a story. And you have a story, and you at home have a story, and I have a story. We all have a story. And we all have a story to share, we all have a story to tell, we all have a story that we're a part of. And some of us, we feel that maybe our story is ending. For some of us, we feel like our story is just beginning. But about 2 weeks ago, I talked about the fact that it is so important that we would share our stories with the next generation. And it's kind of been a big theme for our church for the past few weeks, that we would share to the next generation our story. You see, here at New Heart Church, we have a vision, right? We have a big pie in the sky, like this is what we want to see happen. And what we want to see happen is that we want to love like Jesus. We want to love like Jesus. That's what we want to do. We want to love like Jesus. We want to be known as a church that loves like Jesus. Because what we believe here at New Heart is we believe that there is no other love like Jesus' love. I remember one of my daughters, I can't remember who it was actually, I don't know whether it was Becky or Maddie, but they're always asking me weird questions. It was definitely Maddie. And Maddie came up to me one day and she goes, "Dad, do you love me more than God?" Right. That is like one of those time bomb kind of questions, right? You got to be careful with that. You got to be careful how you answer that. Right, and she knew, she's been learning stuff at school about the Bible and about God, and we shouldn't love anyone more than God and all this kinds of stuff. And I turned to her and I said, "You know what?" I said, "I think I do love God more than I love you, but I think loving God helps me to love you more." Right? The loving God part, when I choose to love God and to lean into loving like Jesus more, it actually enables me to love you more. And so I said to her, "You actually want me to love God more, and you want me to experience the love of God more. Same as I want you to love God more than me, because when you experience more of the love of God, you're going to love me better." And we want to be a church that loves like Jesus. We want to be a church that loves like Jesus, because we believe here that Jesus is the ultimate love. The love that he exemplifies, the love that he taught, the love that he shared, was a love that we believe the world needs right now. And you at home need it. We all need it here. We need to experience that love, and we need to extend that love. But it gets kind of messy. It gets kind of like a little bit all over the place for us at times. And I want to share a little bit about that this morning. You see, I want to share this morning from Luke 15. It's one of my favorite chapters in all of the Bible, because Jesus actually shares 3 stories. He shares 3 stories, and they're not true stories, but there's still a story nonetheless. And so it starts off by saying that in Luke 15, 1-2, it says, "Now the tax collectors and sinners were all gathering around to hear Jesus." Listen to who's gathering around Jesus. It's the tax collectors and it's the sinners, right? Everyone, you're going to have to start, see, for months now, I couldn't get anyone to repeat with me officially. So I never knew whether people were doing it at home. But now we've got a few people in the room. I'm going to get you guys to say it out loud just to help me a little bit, all right? So now the tax collectors and the sinners. That's right, the sinners, right? They were all gathering around to hear Jesus, but the Pharisees and the teachers of the law muttered. Everyone say muttered. You at home, you've got to say muttered as well, all right, so we can hear you. They muttered. Now that word muttered is like, I just think of like under your breath kind of, like that. Nothing good's going to come out of that muttering, right? And so they're sitting there, the teachers and the law abiders and the guys that were considered holy. They were sort of sitting there and they were going, I cannot believe that the guy that is full of love has the tax collectors and the sinners around him. The guy that actually thinks and says that he's the Son of God, I can't believe that he has this type of person around him. And it even says, this man welcomes sinners and eats with them. This man welcomes. Everyone say welcomes. This man welcomes sinners and eats with them. In other words, Jesus not only sits with them, he welcomes them. And he eats with them, and he receives them, and he loves them, because that is what welcoming is. It's an expression of love. Now, the tax collectors and sinners were all gathering around to hear Jesus, and the opposite to the tax collector and the sinner was the Pharisee and the teachers of the law, the religious, the pastors, the guys that were meant to be full of love, the guys that were meant to be the very representation of God. They're the opposite to the sinners and the tax collectors. And this man, Jesus, welcomes the sinners and eats with them. Welcomes the sinners and eats with them. But the Pharisees and the teachers of the law muttered, this man welcomes sinners and he eats with them. Let me ask you a question. Whether you're watching online, whether you're here with us this morning, let me ask you this question. Would New Heart be described as a place that welcomes sinners? Would New Heart be described as a place that welcomes sinners? Or would it just be described as a place that welcomes people that are just like them? That are just like them? Would New Heart be described as a place that welcomes sinners? Sinners has got such a negative connotation with it, right? Sinners is still like today, it's like a bad word, right? And churches all across the world are trying not to use it. Sinners, right? This idea of that you're a sinner, right? You're someone that is bad, that is evil, that is doing something against God. Would New Heart be described as a place that welcomes that? Okay? Here's why we should be a place that welcomes it, okay? We should be a place that welcomes it because we are it. Are you with me this morning? Like, we should be a place that welcomes sinners because we are sinners. You're a sinner, I'm a sinner, they're a sinner, we're all sinners. We're all people that are not deserving of Jesus' love. We're not deserving of Jesus' grace. We're not deserving of any of it. We're not deserving of being able to gather around him. We're not deserving of his welcoming. We're not deserving of his grace and his love. We don't even deserve to eat with him. We are all sinners. And what happens is that amongst all of this, we create a world, we create a void where we think somehow we earned our way to the table. We think somehow that our story is actually better than their story. Well, you might hear things like this, well, at least I didn't do that. Have you ever tried to justify something before? Well, at least I don't think like that. At least I don't talk like that. At least I don't dress like that. At least I don't act like that. At least I don't talk to my children like that. See, what you're doing there is you're comparing your story to their story, And you're saying that your story is better than their story. And when Jesus looks at us, he doesn't compare our stories. He just looks at our story. I want to get rid of a myth this morning. I want to challenge us to something. I want to be completely open and transparent. New Heart Church is actually about numbers. We're actually about numbers. You know, you hear churches say that all the time. We're like, well, we're not about the numbers here. We're not about the numbers here. We're not about the numbers here. We are absolutely about the numbers here. We want as many numbers coming through our door. We want to see as many numbers be in this place. I know we can't right now officially because of COVID, but that's what we want to see, right? Why do we want that? Here's why we want that. There's nothing wrong with numbers. The reason why we want that is because every number has a name. Every number has a name. Every number that walks through that door has a name. You have a name. You at home, you have a name. And every name has a story. Every number has a name, and every name has a story. You have a story. You have a story. You have a story. I have a story. We all have stories. You count. You matter. Your number is important because your number has a name and your name has a story. And that story has the potential to add to God's glory. Do you see how I rhymed that? Wow. That all sounds really neat, right? Your story has the potential to add to God's glory. That's why God never discounts a story. Your life is your story. Your number has a name. We could count how many people are in this room. We could count how many people are watching at home. In fact, we do that every single week. We see numbers in the top of the corner. We see numbers through our statistics and things that come through. We see numbers, and what we have to start realizing is every single one of those numbers have a name. And every single name has a story. And that story is important to God, and we should hold that story as just as important here at New Heart. New Heart, I would love for New Heart to be known for the way they love. We love like Jesus, but it would also love to be known as a church that welcomes every single, not sinner. Let's let that word sinner just fizzle out for a moment. But this place would be known as a place that celebrates everyone's story. Because every single story has potential to add to God's glory. Every number has a name, every name has a story, and every story has the potential to add to God's glory. You have a story. And that's why we named this series Your Story. Because over the next few weeks, I'm not going to be speaking, which is awesome, and you should be happy about that. Over the next few weeks, we're going to have other people up here sharing their story. And we as New Heart, we need to celebrate those stories. But here's the thing. It's not even about just welcoming that story, because a couple of weeks ago, I shared from this passage as well. I shared from John 13, and it says this, "Now that I, your Lord and teacher, have washed your feet, you also should wash one another's feet." Everyone say one another. "I have set you an example that you should do as I have done for you." Listen to that line. "I have set an example that you should do as I have done for you." See, not only did Jesus just hear the story, not only did Jesus welcome the story, Jesus served the story. Isn't that crazy? Jesus didn't just say to people, "Hey, come through the door, be a part of this. Wow, your story's pretty incredible. Wow, your story's pretty sad. Wow, your story's pretty heartbreaking. Wow, your story's pretty incredible." No, they served the number. They served the name. They served the story, and they said, that story is an incredible story. That story has the power to impact other people's lives. And Jesus not only did that himself, he then set an example for us to do the same. That we would serve other people, that we would serve one another, no matter how messy, and no matter how entangled, no matter how disruptive, that story or their story is that we would serve that name, that number. What an incredibly hard task that Jesus has given us. Because all of us have varying degrees, don't we? Like, we all have varying points of what we can tolerate. See, what annoys me might not necessarily annoy other people, and so they're able to tolerate that, right? You know, so for some of us, you know, it could be a marriage breakup or an affair, and we're sort of like, oh, I will never be able to spend time with that person ever again. I'd never be able to serve them. Because it just rubs me the wrong way. I can't handle that. And then there's other people that just seem to handle it so well. It just doesn't seem to bother them. They love them. They encourage them. They welcome them. But this person can't do that, right? Or there's varying degrees of this. But, you know, maybe it's, you know, forms of abuse. Maybe it's forms of hatred. Maybe it's forms of violence. Whatever it is, there's all these varying degrees that we have on what we can tolerate. And I want to encourage us that Jesus set the example, and he didn't discriminate when it came to tolerating. He didn't sit there and say, well, you know, this guy's out, this guy's in, this girl, she can come in, but that girl can't. He washed everyone's feet, and he encouraged the church, us, his people, to do the same. Jesus embraced your story because your story is just as bad as everyone else's story. It's just that you tell it now in a different light. You tell it now in a different way. I have set an example that you should do as I have done for you. I don't know about you, but washing feet physically has the potential to get messy, yeah? Have you ever seen some people's feet? It's pretty gross for some people, right? Probably my feet are gross to some people too, but just the whole idea of washing feet, it's going to get messy. But do you know what? Love is messy. Love is messy. There's times where we've got to shut our eyes to the things that people do in order to love them properly. Sometimes we've got to try and ignore certain things, certain actions, certain attitudes in order that we would love people properly. Here's the thing. Life is messy. It's not clean. It's not clear-cut. People's stories are messy, and we have to choose to get messy as well. Because love is messy. And, might I add, love is unfair. It's unfair. And here's another statement for you this morning. God is unfair. But you want God to be unfair. You want him to be unfair. You don't want God to be fair. Here's why you don't want God to be fair. Because the very people that we think we're excluding because they're sinners, the very people that we push out our doors because their story is too messy and too complex, we're no different in God's eyes. It's not like he's sort of saying, well, everyone in the New Heart building, everyone that's sort of in the New Heart building, they're the ones that are all good, right? They're the ones that are above my fairness. No, God is unfair to everyone across the board. And we should be glad that he's unfair, because we should be so intensely happy that he does not treat us as our stories and our sins deserve. He loves us despite us. And he calls us to do the same. But what we do is, we tend to feel awkward when we feel like God hasn't punished properly. Have you ever felt that? Like, we tend to feel awkward when, so like sometimes, like something I catch myself on a little bit as being a dad of 4 beautiful girls and all that kinds of things, and interacting with them. And sometimes when my kids do something, right, and another parent reacts to it, sometimes I feel like that void they're expecting me to punish because they think that something should be punished. Does that make sense? And so sometimes, like, I'll sort of scold at my kids, not because I particularly thought they did anything wrong, but just because I thought, well, this is awkward and maybe I should say something, right? I don't actually believe what I'm saying. I just feel like there's a gap there and I should fill it. And I think Christians do the same. I think followers of God do the same. They think, hey, God doesn't really seem to be speaking into this situation, so I should just fill it with what I think God would want. And what we often fill it with is judgment. We fill it with frustration. We fill it with some sort of crazy Bible verse that we've picked up out of nowhere, out of obscurity, and we just placed it on this situation and said, that's how we deal with it. And I think God's just sitting there going, there's nothing to punish. There's nothing to be judgmental about. I'm not angry. I'm not mad. I'm not anything. But we sort of feel like there's this imbalance with God where, no, you've got to like deal with this, so I'll deal with it for you. And I think God's looking at us and saying, could you stop dealing with it? And could you start being what I need you to be? And that's love. The very example of love. I need you to wash these people's feet. I need you to serve them, and I need you to show them that there is a God who loves them. We've got a tremendous, tremendous opportunity to be love to those whose stories are a little bit messy. To be a little bit messy. And listen, I think we've also got another thing where we feel like we've got to solve the messiness. I don't think Jesus came to solve everyone's problems. I don't think Jesus came to solve every situation. I think Jesus just came to be messy with those people in their circumstances, in their situations. We can't have like the bravado, heroic, there's a damsel in distress and we're going to come in on the horse and save them. I think sometimes we've just got to decide that we're going to get messy as well. And it's going to seem unfair and it's going to seem like there's no justice, but that's how God works. So I said that Jesus shared a couple of stories. These Pharisees and these teachers of the law, they were muttering to themselves, how can this man welcome sinners the way he's welcoming them? Jesus goes on to tell 3 stories. He says, you know what? There was 100 sheep, right, in a paddock. And one day the shepherd came and he counted and he found that there was only 99. And so what he did is that he left the 99 sheep in the paddock and he went and found the one sheep that was lost. And he found the one sheep, the one, right? What's that? 1 out of 100? That's 1%, yes? Many of us would not worry about the 1%. He's like, well, I'm going to go and I'm going to find that one. But when he found that 1%, when he found that one sheep, he came back and he called the whole village together and they celebrated because the sheep that was lost was now found. Do you know what? We have to come to church and we have to come to New Heart. We have to come together to our open houses and all those things with the mentality that says, not everyone is here. Sometimes we, especially now that we've got to like register online and all those kinds of things, sometimes we have this notion where we're ticking the box that people are here and they're attending. We've got to stop that because not everyone is here. In our minds, we've got to get beyond the checklist and we've got to say, well, is everyone here this week? No, not everyone is here because there's always that 1%, that one sheep that's outside. He talks about this widower, this old lady who had a couple of coins and she lost one coin, and so she turns the whole house upside down trying to find this one coin, and when she found the one coin, she brought all her friends together, and the crazy thing is that she probably put on a party that was way more expensive than the one coin she found. Which sort of describes God as this father or this being who looks at us and that's like just exuberant with his celebration for those whose stories have come home. But then there's a third story, and it's my favorite story. It's the one of a father with 2 sons. Father with 2 sons, and one of the sons comes up to the father, the younger one, and he says, Dad, I want my share. I want my share of your inheritance. I want it now. In other words, what this son is kind of essentially saying to the dad is, I wish you were dead, and I wish I got what was mine, and I just don't want to be a part of this anymore. If you're a parent, that is like a horrific thing to hear, by the way. That would be like absolutely devastating. I wish you weren't here, and I wish I had your money. Pretty harsh, yeah? I wish you weren't here. I wish I had your money. So the father, being a loving father, gave this son his share, and he went and he squandered it. He squandered it with booze, and he squandered it with women, with people that thought they were his friends, having parties, and he just wasn't very wise with what he'd been given. And his life and his story got to such a state that he was found hungering after what the pigs were eating. And he's sitting there in his mess, because that's what it would have been. It would have been a mess That's why they call it a pigsty, right? It's because it's a mess. He's sitting in his mess, and he goes, my father's like servants. They have like plenty of food. They never go hungry. So I'm just going to head back home and I'm going to apologize. And maybe, hopefully, my father would allow me to be a slave. So he comes home and the classic verse is this: while he was a long way off into the distance, the father saw him and he felt compassion, a movement within himself. And he ran down his son and he tackled him and he hugged him and he kissed him. And the son started to say, hey, if only I could be a servant. And he said, no, stop that. Bring out the best robe. Bring out new sandals for his feet. Bring out the finest ring and the jewelry. Put it on him, because this son of mine was lost, but now he's found, and we're going to celebrate. You see, Jesus celebrates our stories. He celebrates the darkness of our stories. He celebrates the lostness of our stories. He celebrates the brokenness of our stories. And he says, if only you would come back home, then we could celebrate it together. That what was once lost is now found, you see, because your story has the potential for his glory. All of a sudden, the father had not lost a son, he had gained a son. All of a sudden, the father was not now disgraced by an attitude that was bad towards him, but he now was full of joy because that son had reignited hope again. Are you with me this morning? His story meant so much to the father that they celebrated it. They celebrated it. And you know what? I think the majority of people in this room right now, all of the people in this room right now, everyone that's watching at home and been watching for weeks on end, your story probably doesn't really coincide with the first son's, but your story will definitely coincide with the second son. You see, because son number 2, whether he's the older or the younger, I'm pretty sure he's the older, he stayed. He stayed and he worked. He stayed committed. He stayed faithful. He stayed loyal. And he's out in the fields and he starts walking back to the house, obviously to have some food or something to eat from his hard day of working. And he's coming in and he all of a sudden he hears music. Read this for yourself, Luke 15. He hears music and he hears dancing. Now, I've shared this before, but I just want to reiterate. That is a pretty pumping dance when you can hear people dancing, right? There's a whole lot of foot stomping going on, right? There's probably some plates being broken. There's probably some yahooing going on. And he's going, what is happening up there, right? What is going on? My auntie, she's thigh slapping, right? She's doing these ones. Getting ready to just pump this party. So he hears that off in the distance. He calls one of the servants. He doesn't go near the house because I think instinctively, deep down, this older brother knew what was going on. My dad doesn't celebrate like this. My father doesn't celebrate like this because he hasn't done it with me. We're about to hear that. I bet that idiotic brother of mine has come home. Hey, and who has not ever called their brother idiotic, right? That low-life, horrible, twisted brother of mine has come home. He doesn't go there because he knows that, so he calls a slave over, he calls a servant over, and he says, what's going on up there? And their servant's really excited, and he's like, your father's so excited because your brother, who was lost, has come home. And the older brother doesn't react. In fact, the reaction he gets is anger. And some of us, we get angry, you see, because we try to fill that void with justice. Well, God's silent on this issue, so I need to fill it. So he tries to fill it. The father actually comes out to him. The father leaves the party. And he comes down to the other brother and he says, hey, listen, your brother's in there. He's back home. And we have to celebrate, right? We got the biggest and best calf. We got the best meat. We're cooking that up. We're eating it all together. You need to come in there and celebrate. And this older brother says, why on earth would I come and celebrate? I have not left your side. I have not moved. My story is better than his story. I was faithful, I was loyal, and you never even gave me like a small animal to kill for me and my friends to celebrate. His story is one of disloyalty. His story is one of backstabbing. His story is one of attitude and angst. He wished you dead. I never did that. I never celebrated that. I never wanted that. I never. My story is better than his story. Why haven't you celebrated my story? And the father just looks at him and he says, son, you have always been here with me. Could have just asked for the animal and I would have given it to you. Could have just done any of that and I would have given you. But his story needs to be celebrated today because he was lost and now he's found. And it says that his father pleaded with him to come in and celebrate. We must celebrate this story. You know what? Sometimes I think the church, New Heart Church, can be a little bit like the older brother. Do you know what? Let's make it a little bit more personal. Sometimes I think I, personally, can be that older brother who refuses to celebrate someone's story because we either try to fill the silence and the void with justice and judgment, or we're not willing to get messy with those people, or, and this is probably the main reason, it's because we believe that our story is better and more worthy of celebration than their story. Well, I never did anything like I didn't backstab my dad. I didn't refuse to love him. I stuck around, not like this guy, comparing stories. And I'm here to tell you this morning that all of us here, our stories matter. Every story matters. Every story, every journey matters because those stories have potential to add to God's glory. And God is always going to celebrate every story. And God is celebrating your story right now as you sit here, as you watch at home. God is celebrating your story. But he wants to celebrate the 1%er's story as well. He wants to celebrate that lost coin, that lost son, that lost sheep. He wants to celebrate their story too. And it means, and it has to come through the church, the older brother, stepping into the mess and celebrating anyway. Because every number has a name, every name has a story, and that story has the potential for God's glory. Over these next few weeks, we're going to talk about other people's stories. I can't wait to hear their stories. I'm not going to speak, I want them to speak. And so I think it's like for the next 5 weeks, we're going to have other people up on this platform sharing their story and giving God the glory for that. And we as a church, we've got to start celebrating the mess, celebrating the unfairness, celebrating everyone's story, because every number has a name and every name has a story. It starts here and it starts now, that our churches would look so messy. They would just look so unconventional. That it would look like tax collectors and and sinners gathering around to share their story. Your story matters. My story matters because they all bring glory to God. I can't encourage you enough to get into this next series, to commit to this next series and say, you know what, I want to be a part of this. Because I really think God's going to challenge us, and I think God's going to encourage us, and I think God's going to make us celebrate everyone's story. Can I pray for you? I want to pray for everyone in this room. I'm going to pray for you at home right now. Your story matters. The younger brother, the prodigal son, if you want, his story mattered. The older brother, his story mattered. The father never ever told him that his story didn't matter. But he did tell him that his story wasn't any more elite than the younger brother's story. All of us has a story. All of us have a story. It's time for us to embrace and welcome everyone's story. God, right now, I thank you that we all have a story. And not only are we to welcome that story, we are to serve that story. We are to bless and encourage and honor the stories that we have, the lives that we've lived. We're encouraged to seek out and to love those that walk through our doors and to love like Jesus, not just love how we feel and love who we feel, but to love like Jesus. And God, I know that some of us, we have some pretty dark, hard stories. But you are not shocked, you are not surprised, you are not taken back by our stories, but you welcome us. God, help us as a church to not fill the void of your silence with judgment. Not to fill the void of your silence with what we think is justice and what we think needs to happen. But that we would look to you and that we would embrace your way. And God, as a church, for many of us that are watching now and for many of us in this room, we find ourselves sometimes like the older brother that just wish for justice, that we just wish that we could give that younger brother what for. But Lord, I pray for the opposite. I pray that we would be the very first people in the room to celebrate another's story. Because every number has a name, and every name has a story, and that story is here to add to your glory. God, right now, even in this moment, may we give you thanks for the story that we have. And may we never build an environment that brings shame, that brings pain to someone else's story. Also, we pray in your name. Amen.